Welcome into the post game. Rockets get a 139-121 road win in Toronto to even up their record at 2-2, go back to 500 this year. I am here with Paulo Alves NBA, or Paulo Alves at Paulo Alves NBA, and Ben DuBose at Ben DuBose. Appreciate both of you guys being here. This is the first time we've done this show with three, so we're going to give this a shot and see how this goes. And guys, this is a big win. I wouldn't say Toronto is the biggest test, but it's a bigger test than Brooklyn, certainly. And the Rockets passed a lot of challenges tonight.
Yeah, and first things first, let's make it clear. The Rockets had to win this game so that the Raptors could be sacrificed in order for the Blue Jays to win. That's the most important thing here. I think Houston sports fans understand where I'm coming from with regards to the Dodgers hate. Look, as far as this game, I come out of this one feeling better than any of the four to this point because the Raptors shot 21 of 40 from three, and yet they lost by 18 at home. And this is not a Raptors team that doesn't have talent. Both Scotty Barnes and Brandon Ingram can fill it up, and they did tonight. And yet the Rockets were just so big. This was a game where they leaned into their rebounding muscle and size. They out-rebounded them 53-22 for the game. And when you can do that, even when the other team can't miss a three, it's just almost impossible to lose, especially when you have the firepower that the Rockets do. They put up nearly 140, and this is a team that through 4 games is in the top 3 of the NBA in offensive rating. So, Dave, you talked in the preseason about the identity shifting to a little bit more offense than defense this year, a lot of it personnel. Well, I think through the first week of the season, we've definitely seen that. And we'll get into Kevin Durant was great as the closer. Jabari was great overall. But off the top, I want to throw a shout out to Steven Adams, who I thought was the MVP of this game. 12 points, 12 rebounds, plus 14 in 20 minutes off the bench. And I think defensively, the way he was able to contest, one of the things you worry about with the double big is, are you going to give up too many threes? I actually thought Steven Adams was one of the best guys on the floor when it came to contesting three-point looks tonight. And he got a couple of them, I think. So kudos to Steven for playing his butt off. And I actually think if you want to be optimistic about this Rockets team, I think one area that people sort of slept on nationally going into this season, everybody was looking at, look, you brought in Kevin Durant, Dorian Finney-Smith when he plays, Josh Okogie, guys like that, but you lost Fred, you lost Dylan, you lost Jalen, and trying to sort of see how it all shakes out relative to the 52-30 formula, number 2 in the West last season. The thing is, Steven Adams is a really good player, and the Rockets basically didn't have him at anywhere near peak strength until the last month of the season because he was coming off of knee surgery, and he didn't even play for a lot of last season. He was, for the first half, maybe even 2/3, occasionally getting bumped from the backup slot by Jock Landale. That's how much he was still struggling. And you look at what we saw tonight, him closing out on threes, diving into the first row of the seats to keep possessions alive. The version of Steven Adams the Rockets have this season is night and day different than the 52-30 team of a year ago. And I think that's something that flew under the radar nationally. The Rockets with Steven, you should basically consider him an addition relative to the 52-30 version a year ago. So I just want to say that off the top. That's something I think going into the year was slept on. It shouldn't be anymore. Steven Adams is a really impactful player. And then beyond Steven, look, Kevin Durant is Kevin Durant. I thought what really stood out tonight was Jabari Smith Jr. And Paulo, I'll tee you up for this because you've been talking over on Rockets Launchpad, our podcast now presented by ClutchFans, by the way. Jabari is someone that the fan base might have been a little too low on going into this year. He's just 22 years old. There's a lot of untapped potential there. And I think the NBA is increasingly becoming a league where you're only as strong as your weakest link. And so defensively, that can at times be problematic. Reed Shepherd, when he plays, is clearly a liability. The teams will attack defensively. When the Rockets go double big and they play zone, they'll try and beat you from the three-point arc. Offensively, we know the attention that the big three, KD, Sengun, and Amen will draw. So oftentimes it comes down to, can you get enough scoring and playmaking from those other two slots? And what I saw tonight, not only did Jabari make shots when he was open, but he also attacked closeouts. He made plays for others. He had 5 assists. And I just thought this was a really, really well-balanced game from him. Defensively, we'll get into some of the concerns because, that same adage, you're only as strong as your weakest link. Right now, at least, without Dorian Finney-Smith, might be holding you back defensively. But offensively, if Jabari Smith Jr. is one of your weaker links, and at least from a scouting report perspective he is, then you're in a really good spot. And that's why the Rockets put up nearly 140 points and have a top 3 net rating in the NBA on the offensive side of the ball.
Yeah, 100%. And I think we're at a point in which a lot of people thought about Jabari since the beginning, since he didn't hit the ground running, as someone who's limited to being, switchable 3-and-D guy. And I think we're seeing more and more of him become perhaps not at that level yet, but more of an Aaron Gordon type, in which, well, you're so good at your role, and you have, a lot of those connective skills as well, which he didn't have coming in. In which you have two guys, obviously with the Rockets, not a guard and a center, but a center and a forward, who are drawing a lot of attention. And you have a lot of space in between everything that's going on to get your shots off. And if there's something that Jabari was always projected to be, was a shot maker, right? And he's in a situation now in which, because everybody's paying so much attention to KD, to Sengun, in which he doesn't really need to generate the advantage himself. He just needs to be in a position to take the shot, because there's always going to be space for him to take that shot, and he's not going to have to even dribble into it or bulldoze his way into it, even though he tries to sometimes. It's just you gotta pick up the ball where you get it and shoot it, and that's what Jabari is really good at, and he's improved basically on all levels of his game, and you're at a point in which you can't really put a ceiling on what Jabari can become, because he's now put in a position in which he can take those shots. Those can be confidence builders, and at the same time, in practice, he's working with KD every day, who's going to help him hone in those skills as well. And so, I just think that a lot of people look at the Rockets and they look at the upside for Sengun, which I think he's basically already hit it. He's already, to me, a superstar. A man still has a long ways to go. Some people talk about Tari Eason as someone who perhaps has some Kawhi level offensive upside or something close to it. And everybody forgets about Jabari, who, just from a skill set standpoint, he doesn't need that many seconds on the ball to get a shot off, and I think he's shown it this game in specific.
Yeah, it's interesting. I thought, to talk about Jabari, I wanted to mention Sengun first. I thought Sengun had an incredibly efficient game tonight. It was almost like a quiet night for Sengun. He wasn't like offensively aggressive, but was very, very efficient. Hit the 3 early on, looked very comfortable doing it. But he was creating, and I think kind of like you guys were saying, Paulo, you specifically, is like the attention was placed on, KD and Sengun. And right out of the gate, Jabari scored the first 7 points of the game. Basically just had a really good aggressive night. And what really stuck out to me for Jabari was that one stretch, I believe it was the third quarter, where he put the ball on the floor, drove left. This was after they not shut down, but they stopped Sengun off the baseline from being able to drive, swung it to KD. They closed on KD and they threw it to Jabari with the shot clock running down. And he drove left and kind of hit that jump shot, maybe 8 feet out. And then the next play, very next possession on a fast break, he dribbled it down and, scored and got the N1. Now, these are kind of basic things. And you're talking about if you're talking about a 3, that's a creating 3, these are going to be rudimentary type of plays. But for Jabari, this is like real progress. You guys remember the first year, where he was really struggling to be able to put the ball on the floor. Every time he did, it was either a turnover or it was a mess. And he has gotten so much better with that handle. If the shot's falling, I'm really happy with where he is. I mean, this is a guy who's the 4th player as far as, who opponents are focusing on. So, and I think he's capable of a lot more. So it's really nice to see Jabari have that big night. I don't know if you guys have something more you want to add on Jabari specifically, but we got to talk about KD in particular, because what he did in the 4th, he's really like a quiet assassin. You kind of overlook what he does. I don't know why, but just every time the Raptors were making a little run, get that thing to 8 or something like that, KD was closing the door in the 4th. And I think if there's a game that we've seen up to this point where KD's the closer, where what he was brought in to do over Jalen Green in the past, this would be the best illustration of it, this game.
Yeah, and I thought, there was an interview that dropped yesterday that Kevin did with the Pivot podcast, and it was in the aftermath of the OKC game, and the hosts were trying to egg him on to say something about not getting the ball enough. And I thought he had some really revealing quotes about, I never liked dictators. And he went on to make the case. I wrote an article about it for Rockets Wire, basically saying he wants these young guys to learn by doing. And I think we've seen that through the first week of the season. They're already getting a little bit better at getting him the ball earlier in shot clocks, at pushing the pace. I know we'll talk about Amen. It's not perfect, but one benefit, Amen is able to push the pace. And so when you do that, you're able to get the ball to Kevin sometimes in transition before the defense can get set. I think that's important. It also helps, of course, that most teams do not have Lou Dort to prevent KD from getting the ball in the first place. But I think going back to his quotes from that Pivot podcast interview, it's very rare in today's NBA to have a star who is at that level offensively, but yet does have some patience. And so I think that's what we've seen early this year. Like, there's probably going to come a time and place, especially by the playoffs, where he wants the ball and he's making it clear that if he hasn't given on a possession, he may not be happy. But right now, he's letting the game come to him. It's just been remarkable how even on nights when he has it going and it feels like, man, why isn't KD getting the ball to put them away? He never seems out of control. He never seems rattled. He just waits and bides his time, and before you know it, the ball comes to him. Maybe it's a second chance opportunity. That happened a couple of times off of kickouts. But regardless, the patience that he plays with, despite being that brilliant offensively, I think is just going to be so valuable to this Rockets team, which has all those developing young pieces that you also want to get better at the same time while you have Kevin Durant.
Yeah, and it really feels like, as the comment that they just brought up on the screen, it felt like at points where last season we were giving up a run and we would let it extend endlessly because offensively we didn't have any reliable go-to guy other than Sengun, who was getting triple teamed. It really felt like he kept the Raptors at arm's length, and it really feels like he understands that this team is, and I think this is something that we'll talk about going forward, which is this team knows it's a playoff team. We're no longer in that mentality in which they have to grip and claw at every single point and every single possession just to prove that they belong. Like, they know they're good. And now they're trying some stuff out to make sure that once the postseason comes along and stuff like that, they are in a position in which they have every weapon in the bag kind of honed in, right? And KD understands that if they wanted to win every game by the maximum margin of points right now, I guarantee you, Reed probably wouldn't be playing as much. The ball would be going through KD and Sengun a lot more than it actually is, even though they're putting up stats. And they'd be hard forcing stuff a lot more, and defensively they wouldn't try as many different lineups and as many different defensive schemes, right? And so I think KD understands that, and he understands that in order for this team to eventually have a ceiling of a championship team, it needs to maximize every single club that's in the bag, right? And that means giving Jabari some possession. That means giving Lee Shepard some possession. That means living with some momentum, some turnovers. That means sometimes even letting Tyrese and dribble the hair out of the ball. But, that's part of the process. And KD's been in the league so long that he knows, like, this sacrifice, like, they're 2-2. Perhaps if I don't think it happened in the OKC game, but perhaps in the Pistons game, if they maximized it a little bit more, perhaps they could have gotten the win. But it's 3-1 with leaving some pieces undeveloped better than 2-2, knowing that you're probably going to make the playoffs anyway, while giving these guys some reps to make sure that eventually, if an injury comes along or if, someone doesn't have it going a certain night, they can go to different guys, because KD doesn't want to be in a situation like last year where, hey, sometimes you're just the only guy, when Devin Booker's not there, you're the only guy on the floor that can get a shot off, and you got all the attention on you. He knows that's not a recipe for success. And, when KD came along, I think that's one of the things that we always highlighted, that he was a perfect fit on the court. And from a basketball knowledge standpoint as well, he understood the Rockets are a perfect team for what he needs at this point in his career. And he understands that it's still a process. Like, they are in win now mode, but they are trying to, make sure that everyone that's already there can be the best versions of themselves.
Yeah, Carlos had mentioned in the live stream chat, or asked, and he said, I didn't watch the game. How did Amen look? And it's interesting. I thought that question, because we were talking about this before we went live. Men finished 7 of 13, 18 points, 9 boards, 7 assists, 3 turnovers. Like, the box score line looks pretty good. He was plus 17 in the game, and Amen always brings the defensive energy and effort. I just thought there were stretches in the game where I'm like, man, Amen is struggling, or just, with his finishing ability, his driving ability, offensively, just in general, I thought he was struggling a little bit at times. But like I said, the box score, when you look at the end of the day, looked pretty good. I want to talk overall just about this team. This really, I mentioned this at halftime. It was like a clash of styles. It was like all tall versus small ball, almost in a way. No Jakob Poeltl in this game, so the Rockets were much bigger than the Raptors. At the same time, the Rockets dominated the glass. I mean, it was 64 to 29. Ooh. It was 34-13 at half, which is just insane. And at halftime, it was 11-0 on offensive rebounding edge, 17-4 at the end of the game. So Rockets just crushed them on the glass. That's a recipe for just a blowout. But what happened today was the Raptors went 21 of 40 from three-point range. We saw Brooklyn get hot in that first half from three-point range. I mean, we know now that rebounding edge is still there. Defense, and is that still there? And to your point, you were talking about, Ben, because we've talked about this as we went along in the preseason. Have the Rockets shifted now to being a much more efficient offensive team with Jalen out and Kevin Durant stepping in, and that is a huge difference in efficiency. That looks to be there, but have they taken a step back defensively?
Yeah, I think that's a fair question, and I think sometimes people are looking at it the wrong way. Like, I've seen some folks asking, why isn't Amen or Jabari making more plays? These guys that were drafted to be top shelf defensive players. Well, a lot of the way the modern NBA works, it comes down to teams hunting your weakest link, to go back to what I said leading off this show. And in this case, when the Rockets are running double big, then other teams know they can typically, now Steven Adams did a pretty good job tonight, all things considered, but typically they can get off a lot of threes. And when the Rockets have Reed Sheppard out there, they can attack Reed. Now, when the Rockets play as the fifth guy, Tari Eason or Josh Okogie, they're more well-balanced, but the question becomes, if Tari or Okogie isn't shooting that well, are you capping your ceiling on offense a little bit relative to having Steven Adams or Reed Sheppard out there? So at least until you get Dorian Finney-Smith back, no matter what you do, there's a weak link a lot of the time, unless it's a really good night for Tari or Okogie. And even if it is, well, guys are going to need breaks. I mean, you don't want any of these guys over the 82-game grind to play more than 35, 36 minutes a night. So the Rockets do have some weaknesses that other teams will attack. And that's one thing relative to last year. Look, Ime Udoka did a good job getting every last drop out of that team. And for all the flaws that we nitpicked with that starting five of Fred, Jalen, Dylan, Jabari, and Sengun, or, well, then Amen and Sengun with Jabari coming off the bench, there were no clear negatives defensively. Even Jalen got to a point where he was really competing his butt off night in, night out. Right now, especially with the Rockets being shorthanded, there are some weaker spots in the rotation, particularly with them being hell-bent on getting Reed minutes for developmental purposes, which, as Paulo said, it's about the bigger picture. But to me, it's not so much about – now, the last couple of games, Amen did get into early foul trouble. Thankfully, he did not tonight. He needs to cut that out. The 4 fouls in the first half against the Pistons, the 2 fouls in the first quarter against the Nets, yeah, that's sloppy, and he needs to be better because when Amen's not on the floor, the Rockets are worse defensively. But in terms of why aren't your defensive playmakers doing things, well, it's really hard when you have a weak link because teams are just going to attack the weak link. And so in time, I think, with Dorian Finney-Smith coming back and or upgrades you can make as you get closer to the trade deadline. The good news, the way I would frame it, and Dave and Paulo, I've talked to you both about this offline, I don't think the Rockets necessarily have a point guard problem. I think they have a fifth starter problem. And so you can potentially bring in a point guard. I'm not saying that you can't, but I think you can also bring in a good player at another position and still get similar bang for your buck. Because offensively, look, Amen isn't perfect. He's having some turnovers that are frustrating, but this is a top 3 offense that put up nearly 140 points on the road. Like, let's not act like that they have no idea what they're doing. No, they have a lot of firepower. They're still very good. In the macro, the issues for this team are defensively. So you need more steadiness on that side. Hopefully Reed and Tari continue to progress and get better. Hopefully Dorian Finney-Smith is back sooner rather than later. If not, you can bring in guys at the trade deadline. But to me, it just comes down to personnel. There's weaker links in the chain than there were a year ago. And Paulo, the other thing I wanted to get your insight on, I also think that psychologically, that team last year had to be dialed in every single possession because it was the only way they could win games. Like they just did not have enough offensive gifts to where they could overcome it if they had a bad night defensively. So I think they were always, playing at like a top 5 level. Whereas this year, they were so good offensively. I saw several possessions tonight, especially in the third quarter, where, the Rockets came out strong in the third, did what good teams do, which is, you absorbed the punch in the first half, Raptors shot the lights out, you made some adjustments, and the Rockets came out, and before you knew it, a 5-point game becomes a 15, 20-point game. But as they were scoring at ease, there were possessions where the Rockets just didn't get back defensively. And I think some of that is just, a mentality change. Like, it's become so easy for them and they're not used to it that they think they can always overcome it by scoring more on offense. Like the post-game interview that Jabari did with Vanessa Richardson, he said, we knew we'd be fine offensively. And so I'm wondering if some of what's happening on defense, I admit personnel is a part, but it also might come down to the fact that from a mentality perspective, offense is coming so easy to these guys that they're not playing with quite the same intensity as they did on a possession in, possession out basis last year. Paulo, does that make sense to you?
Yeah, I'm 100% with you as far as I think it's a combination of two things. I think, first of all, yes, they're taking possessions off and they're giving up, just pull-up threes. They're not even picking up the ball and they're giving up points that way as well. But I think besides that, it's also a case that even last year, there were plenty of possessions where we played perfect defense, knowing that there's a certain guy on the other team that we're more comfortable letting him shoot. Everybody remembers the Dorian Finney-Smith game with the Nets from last season. We played really good defense, but we also took really good bets as far as who we let shoot those threes, and sometimes we left them open to be able to play such lockdown defense. Yeah. And so I think what's happening now is that there's a little bit of variance as well. Like Brooklyn and Toronto, yes, we do play a little bit into it by leaving some shooters open, but they're not going to shoot over 50% from three like they did against us. So I think some of it's small sample size. Some of it is sometimes it's not as well of a machine as it was last season. Sometimes we leave the wrong guy open. I remember Luke Kennard making a couple of shots. I'm like, that's the one guy you don't leave open. So sometimes that happens. Sometimes teams are just catching fire, and I don't think that's sustainable long term.
Like Scotty Barnes had 4 threes in 14 minutes tonight, and he was a 27% guy a year ago.
Yeah,
exactly. So you're probably comfortable letting him shoot it. He's probably not going to make 4 or 5 in the first half any other game this season. And I think it's in large part to what you said as well. Like last season, they were so bad at scoring that they had to give 120% every single possession. This year, they don't need to do that as much. And it's personnel as well. Like, let's be honest. KD is putting in effort, not questioning that at all, but Jalen Green was also putting up like 120% effort on defense as well. And that's a little bit of a gap as well, combined with every other starter going from 120 to like 80% effort because they know they're really good on offense right now. But I do think that while it's something, I do think that's also something that they're playing around with schemes. But at the same time, I think if a game gets really tight, like they did against OKC, for example, that they are able to lock in. And I think as the season goes on, that the quality of that locking in later in games will get better as they get more and more used to playing with each other. But yeah, it has a lot to do with just not needing to give up that level of defensive intensity as well.
Yeah, it's tonight I was watching the game, and we saw this in some of the other games as well, but there was, I thought, especially the OKC game, there's been a lot of wide open threes by opponents. I know tonight there was the one, it was in transition that stuck out to me. I think it was Mamu Kilishvili coming back. It was KD not getting back in time. I think he might have been on offense and just got back late into the play. Wide open, knocked a top of the key 3 down. There were a few others, but some of them tonight as well. Like, Sengun had a hand in the guy's face or on the shot, or Jabari did, and they still knocked him down. They were definitely hot tonight. But, as far as the defense, to me, when they traded for KD, that's going to be, solid move and all that stuff. But it's losing Dillon was the kind of the concern. He was your leading 3-point shooter last year. He is a guy who just is key to that identity, the physical defensive play. I think they knew they needed to replace that, and that's why they got Dorian Finney-Smith. So even though we've never seen Dorian Finney-Smith play here, and I hope people realize this guy like kind of turned around the Lakers defense almost by himself. Like he was a significant loss for that
playing
team.
on a bum ankle.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, I don't know if he's going to have the same impact here, but he's going to fit like a glove, I would think, based on what Ime Udoka wants to do. So I know it's weird to say that you're missing him, because you're definitely missing Dylan Brooks, but you brought in a replacement. We just haven't seen him yet. So I don't want to judge the defense, and we've said this a lot, until he gets back. And I think Ime Udoka will figure it out. Defense is his calling card. It's so key to the success that he wants to have. I think that they'll figure that out, but it does concern me a little bit. The offense is better. Defense has taken a step back. I mean, coming into this game, I believe they were middle of the pack, around 15 or 16. That may have changed, but
and on the subject of picking it up and locking in when it mattered, I know we're talking about defense, but when we mentioned Amen earlier, one thing I wanted to highlight, he did have a couple of really big buckets in the fourth quarter when the Raptors, were making that run, trying to make one last push at home. And it reminded me of those buckets he had late in the fourth quarter before the calf cramps against the Thunder that almost put OKC away. And I thought that was really encouraging, because for a lot of the night, I thought Amen's defense was better tonight because he wasn't in foul trouble, but he seemed a little bit careless at times. And offensively, for whatever reason, the touch wasn't quite there in the first three quarters. But when the game mattered, he was able to find that and to make the plays that needed to be made for the Rockets to put Toronto away. And so I thought that was a really good sign. Defensively is where you often think about it, just picking up the effort when it matters most. But I thought offensively for Amen, there was a clear bump in focus when it really mattered in winning time in the fourth quarter. And I want to make sure that we noted that as well.
Yeah. Just Paulo, if you want to have anything else you want to say before we close, but Reed Shepherd, I have to just ask, any thoughts on Reed tonight? He goes 2 for 7 from the field. Any improvements, downgrades, anything jump out off the page?
Yeah, I'll go quick and then I'll turn things over to Paulo. But with Reed, he's just got to make more open shots. Like, there was a sequence in the first half where he had 2 wide open threes from the same spot in like a 5-second span, and he missed them both. And it's like, he does so many things well. He's high IQ. He's instinctive. Clearly, he's working his butt off, but he has certain limitations. Like, when he's on the floor, teams are going to attack him. That is a big part of why Houston's defense is struggling. In a game they won by 18, I think he was +0 in the plus minus. Like, he is a liability defensively, and at least at this stage in his career, he's got to make shots to offset that. And to this point in his NBA career, he hasn't done that enough. Now, small sample, we have a ton of evidence that suggests he's a great shooting prospect, so it should be fine. And unlike last year, they're going to keep putting him out there. The sample size is going to grow, and hopefully this is all just small sample size theater and it evens out. But right now, I mean, so much of it just comes down to, we're talking about his night entirely differently if he makes a couple more threes, especially just like one of those 2 that came right to him wide open twice in a row, and he just can't make them. And, the other stuff is frustrating. It's going to take a lot more time to fully resolve that. I think in the short term, he needs to make more shots. For me, it's that simple.
Yeah, and I think one of the things that we were looking, to get from Reed Shepherd was more confidence shooting and more confidence handling the ball and, driving the lanes. And I do think that that's there. He's just not making the shots. But I do think for the first 4 games of the season, I'm not saying he's playing well, but I do think he's one of those bets in which you're giving him time now, and you hope that turns into a rotation piece later on when you get to the offseason, right? And so having that in mind, at this point, I'm happy that he's still playing confident and he's still taking the shots. The next step is actually making them. But 4 games in, I'm okay giving it a little bit more leeway. As I said, if the Rockets wanted to maximize their winning percentage, they would likely play Aaron Holiday right now. That's a fact. But at the same time, it's a bet that they're making, and I think hopefully long term it pays off. If it doesn't, well, you still have Aaron Holiday there, and you still have the moves to make in December if you feel like you need to go get a guard.
Yeah, I can see the vision with Reed. It's still early. I'm giving him obviously more runway. He had that play tonight. It was kind of Chris Paul-esque where he kind of wiggled his way to between the free throw line, top of the key, and knocked down that jumper. But yeah, 2 for 7 from the field, not particularly great night. I think he was 0 for 4, from 3-point range.
I do think maybe you can help it by not running as many lineups with both Reed and the double big, or at least not a double big that includes Clint Capella. Capella was -9 tonight. A big part of that, the Raptors were on fire from 3, especially in the first half. And when Steven was out there, he was just a menace closing out on threes. The other 2, not as much. And so when it was Sengun and Capella, then Capella didn't have quite the mobility closing out on the perimeter. And that's part of what happened when the Raptors, just blitzed Houston from beyond the arc. But I think when you play both Reed and the double big, then that's two different ways that defenses can attack you. And so I think it's very easy for things to spiral. So in the short term, I think one other thing that Ime Udoka might consider doing, not running both Reed and the double big, or at least if it is the double big, make sure that it's both Sengun and Steven Adams, your clear top two, because I thought the minutes when it was Reed and Capella together, and again, Capella -9 in the plus minus, I thought those were especially rough, and it sort of just compounds what is already a weakness when Reed is on the floor, and that's the defensive side of the ball.
Yeah, absolutely. I'll just say this, guys. We have the chance to go over 500 on Saturday, November 1st. Rockets play in Boston. Sneaky game here because we already kind of were lulled into sleep thinking, I believe the Celtics started 0-3. They're now 2-3, but I believe they started 0-3. And we thought, well, they're tanking there. Horford's gone. Tatum's out. They're kind of Giroux's gone. They just beat the Cavs tonight by 20. So it's, the Rockets better bring it. I don't want them to fall asleep on Boston, and they have a chance to go over 500. Anything you guys want to say before we close up?
One hilarious comment from the chat. Maybe we can kidnap Pritchard and swap him with Reed and Boston won't notice. And secondly, go Blue Jays.
Absolutely. Ben, Paulo, appreciate both of you guys doing this tonight. We'll be back. I hope everyone has a great Halloween. We'll be back Saturday after the game to talk Rockets Celtics. That will be a great one. Thank you guys. Appreciate it. And we will see y'all then.